And something that my government is going to do is to use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers of the federal government, to accelerate the major projects that we need in order to build this economy and take on the Americans.
Thank you for joining me. Happy Valentine's Day. Hope your heart is well and you're in love. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. We've got so much to share with you today. Some of it very good news. I know you can't wait. We'll be right back with more. We need political change. But we also need the resolve to resist. I hope you enjoyed that little vignette at the beginning. Wonderful little production to show you how Klaus Schwab as Darth Vader is really Mark Carney. This is the man who apparently is just so popular. He's tied with Pierre Poilievre, and we've seen this. But before I go any further, please like the station. I always forget to do this, but please like the station at this point so we can beat the YouTube suppression. We don't beat it, well, we're going to stay on the air. That's just the way it's going to be. This is Valentine's Day. Try to be upbeat on Valentine's. I'll tell you why. Because I've had so many bad things happen to me on Valentine's Day over the years. It's almost like I'm expecting it to happen. But if we resolve to resist the negativity, we can overcome it. And that's what we need to do. Not only with politics, we're facing a huge challenge, and I hate to use that word. We're facing catastrophe with continued liberal government and with Mark Carney potentially becoming the prime minister. We can resolve to resist that. And I've got some good news coming. I can't wait to share it with you, but I just wanted to share this private bit that Valentine's Day, I've had so many bad experiences. I came home one night from the airport and I returned to an empty house. I won't go into the details about that. That was many, many years ago. I've had very difficult experience. I lost a job one time on Valentine's Day. But I can tell you, I can see broad, sunlit hills on the horizon. And I just think we need to be upbeat and positive, especially on this day. So, I showed you this yesterday. Here he is, Mark Carney, apparently going to be tied with Pierre Poilievre. And the Liberals tied with the Conservatives. Mark Carney becomes the leader. Not going to happen, folks. This poll is really only based on 1,000 people, and I don't think it's entirely scientific. Let me just put it that way. Here's the good news, folks. Abacus data poll. Conservatives lead by 19 as Liberal vote shares rise. At the expense of whom? The NDP. That's where the hemorrhaging is going on, not from the Conservative Party. You have seen every indication lately that somehow the support for the Conservatives is soft, it's weak, and it's collapsing. Not true. Now, I trust Abacus data poll. David Colliette has been right on so many occasions when other pollsters have been wrong. He has been charting the lead of the Conservative Party quite accurately for quite some time now. And I think let's have a look at this. Yeah, 19 points. The NDP is plummeting. In fact, they could be even 3 points behind this. Interesting enough, People's Party of Canada tied with the Green Party. Maybe we'll finally see them get some recognition when polls are mentioned, because they always love to mention the Green Party, but never the People's Party of Canada. And so what's going on with all of this? Well, I'll tell you what. The Globe and Mail and other mainstream media outlets have been running around in circles promoting Mark Carney. Here they are, suggesting that the best retaliation against the United States, and I thought we were trying not to retaliate, but to get the tariff lifted. So why are we talking about retaliation? The Globe and Mail wants a trade war just as much as the Trudeau government wants a trade war, just as much as Mark Carney wants a trade war, because it's the only way they can potentially win. As I've said many times, the Liberal Party wants to run against Donald Trump, not against the Conservative Party of Canada. They think they've got a better way of winning if they demonize Donald Trump in the United States and run against them. That's what the Liberal Party has done in the past. Created this faux sense of nationalism, patriotism, pride by hating the United States and all things American. And this is what they intend to do. So why is the Globe and Mail saying a carbon tax tariff is a good idea? It's an insane idea from the mind of Mark Carney, the same Mark Carney who said, hey, don't worry about steel. We don't use steel anymore. I'm not going to show that again today. But that's the kind of insanity we are seeing from Mark Carney. But yet, the mainstream media continues to push Mark Carney as the only viable choice. Now, I love this. This is from Andrew Coyne a couple of days ago. Andrew Coyne is all in for Mark Carney. All in. And this is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from this because when the plane hits some turbulence, you're maybe going to want a pilot to fly it. So he's saying, why is Poilievre slumping in the polls? To reiterate the fake polls out there that are suggesting Poilievre is somehow tied with Mark Carney. It has something to do with his character, at any rate, with what he has chosen to reveal of that character. Go after Poilievre personally. Though a gifted communicator and sometimes incisive critic, he has made more of a name for himself as an opposition leader rather than a prime minister in waiting. I disagree. The crisis has only sharpened that impression. Mr. Poilievre has looked uncertain, rattled off key, and strangely callow. A conservative friend of mine, I doubt it, a man of robustly right-wing views and long service in the party, refers to him as a punk kid. There is a distinct lack of gravitas and adolescent unseriousness that, in more normal times, one might try to look past. That is really a low blow, which I've been critical of Poilievre for his stance on Ukraine, his stance with the Khalistanis, but to call him adolescent or unserious is absolute rubbish. And to somehow suggest Mark Carney is serious, and this is in this column as well. Mark Carney is Mr. Serious. Mr. Serious at what? Looking like a buffoon? Mark Carney hasn't got any kind of substantive plan, rather than making ridiculous promises that he knows he will not keep. And to suggest he's going to double tax you on the carbon tax. It's going to be a double carbon tax. So to suggest Poilievre is unserious, this is why I'm encouraging everybody to go to the rally tomorrow, the Rogers Centre in Ottawa, 1 o'clock. Register on the Conservative Party of Canada website. I'm not going to put that up again, but do so. Be there. Find out just how unserious this man is. How unserious Pierre Poilievre is. Because you'll find out he's quite serious about being prime minister. He's quite serious about taking on Mark Carney. He is amending his strategy because the Liberals have been very clever to try to make this next election about Donald Trump and not the Conservative Party, as I've said before. I'm looking forward to Poilievre hitting back hard. I'm guessing it's going to be about freedom and lowering taxes, lessening regulation, and making Canada a country of less government. That's where we need to go in this country. Not a country of more government under Mark Carney, but a country of less government interference, not just in the economy, not just in fiscal affairs, but in our lives. How many times has Poilievre talked about a mind your own business government that doesn't tell you how to raise your children, doesn't tell you where to go to church or not to go to church, doesn't tell you that you should be forced to give something called gender affirming care to your children, that your children can change their pronouns without telling you. That's Justin Trudeau's philosophy, and you can bet as a globalist, Mark Carney has the same philosophy. He doesn't want to talk about that right now because he knows it's very unpopular. So he'll tell you he wants to cut middle class taxes. Yeah. He'll tell you he wants to balance the budget. Uh-huh. But let's continue with Andrew Coyne's ridiculous assumption. But here we are. The plane is aloft with 42 million passengers on board. The pilot has left the controls, and now, soon, we must choose who would replace him. We know a fair amount, for good or ill, about Mr. Poilievre, having watched him grow up, or fail to, in his 20 years as a member of Parliament. We know very little about Mr. Carney. Actually, we know quite a bit about Mr. Carney. That's a lie. We know he's been a failure as the governor of the Bank of England. Even the Liberal leadership is no sure thing, as commanding as his lead appears. At the moment, his French is limited. Well, yes, we can all tell that. He can appear wooden on stage. No, boring, bland, and banal. He is quick-witted. No, he's not. He's slow-witted. And at least he admits he does not come across as warm. What's the downside? How much worse can it get? The Liberals will be guided by one thing: who can win, or at least limit their losses. The country, however, needs to pick a pilot. Oh, so Mark Carney's the pilot. What skills do we think are more important? Those acquired in a lifetime of experience in politics, but none outside of it? Or those that come from years of managing organizations in and around government, but not in politics? How about managing organizations into the ground? That has been Mark Carney's experience. More important, perhaps, is who has the character, the nerve, and the resilience to steer the country through the bumpy skies ahead. Who can find the right mixture of steel? He doesn't think steel's important. And diplomacy to deal with Mr. Trump. Who has the judgment, equal parts intelligence, experience, and temperament to know what is important to focus on, particularly during a crisis? All right, I've had enough of Andrew Coyne today. But that's where the Globe and Mail has been coming from for weeks. They're promoting, they are propagating Mark Carney as the savior, not only of the Liberal Party, but of Canada. And it's bunk. Mark Carney has no record to run on, not just as a politician, but as an appointed lackey of governments around the world, as an appointed lackey of the United Nations. He has no record to run on. And that's where that's the good news, is that the polling is not what we've been told. And this race is not going to be won by Mark Carney and the Liberals. They're not going to pull the wool over our eyes again. They're not going to fool Canadians one more time. They're not going to extend a decade of decline, of loss, of absolute economic catastrophe into another 4 years. It's not going to happen, because we are going to resolve to resist, and we are going to fight back. And we are fighting back. And we are going to reach a reasonable agreement with Donald Trump. because the left wants you to throw Donald Trump up with the bathwater right now. They want you to be mad at Donald Trump and everything he's doing to destroy the DEI programs or critical race programs in the States, the fact he wants the Jeffrey Epstein file opened up, the fact he wants to know who assassinated JFK, the fact that he wants to fight back on all of the deep state initiatives. The left in Canada wants you to hate Donald Trump because they want you to hate what he's doing as president, the good things he's doing. We can get over this tariff nonsense. We can get over this potential trade war. We can fight back, but we can also negotiate. And that's what premiers like Daniel Smith are encouraging. And that's what Pierre Poilievre, as leader of the Conservative Party, is encouraging. And that's what he will do as our next prime minister. And that's what we have to keep reminding ourselves. Now, another thing I love about Donald Trump right now is he's finding a solution to the war in Ukraine. And overnight, this shifted. We were that close to a nuclear war with Russia during the dying days of the Biden administration, sending missiles that Ukraine was sending into Russian territory, daring Russian President Vladimir Putin to strike back. The idiot talk from Emmanuel Macron about sending troops and invading Russia. The crazy talk from Herr Keir Starmer, the Labour Party British Prime Minister, who wanted to have a war with Russia. It was all nonsense because they couldn't even fight a war with a third world country. They're not even equipped to do that. They couldn't fight a war with Russia. They wanted America to fight a war with Russia. And finally, there's an American president who says, we're not going to fight that war with Russia because we're not going to annihilate 2/3 of the world's population in a nuclear war because that's where it's going to go pretty darn fast. No. And Donald Trump has made an incredible announcement yesterday, if you didn't hear this. Not just that he wants to stop the war in Ukraine, and he's going to stop the war in Ukraine. He's going to broker a peace that Vladimir Putin wants as well. He wants to sit down with the leaders of Russia and China and talk about reducing the nuclear arsenal even further. But even more important, this is incredible, folks. He wants to cut the military budget by a half. Let's listen to this and then I can comment.
You know, other countries want to have a strong United States. They want to have a strong America. And I think it's going to make us very, very strong, much stronger. And we have a lot of work we're doing on the military. Our military already, I've authorized some contracts to be built that are very substantial. We're building the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest military equipment in the world. We're building it. At some point, when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China, and I'm going to meet with Russia, in particular, those two. And I'm going to say, there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on military. There's no reason for you to be spending $400 billion. China's going to be at $400 billion. We're at $1 trillion. We're going to be at close to $1 trillion. And I'm going to say, we can settle this on, we can spend this on other things. We don't have to spend this on military because, and I'm going to be meeting with China. You know, we were trying to de-escalate nuclear, and I was in a position where Russia had agreed and China had agreed we were going to start, and then we had a rigged election, so that never took place. But this one was too big to rig. We won by so much that it was too big to rig.
You want to do the China meeting in the United States, or would you travel to China for that?
For what?
A China meeting. Would you do that here?
I tell people all the time, you know, the question is who's going to have the first meeting, where are you going to, I say this to Putin, to President Xi, I say to everybody, never bothered me, you know, I'm willing to say I'll go first. It doesn't matter. It's the end result that counts. So it doesn't make any difference.
When do you want to have a conversation about global defense spending, you, China,
Well, I'd
Russia?
like to have that, as soon as things settle down, I'm going to have that conference, primarily with China and Russia, because those are the two that really are out there. And we're going to have them spend a lot less money, and we're going to spend a lot less money. And I know they're going to do it. They agreed to it. We were talking about denuclearizing, and President Putin and I agreed that we were going to do it in a very big way. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many. You could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons, and they're building nuclear weapons, and China's building new nuclear weapons, and China's trying to catch up because, you know, they're very substantially behind, but within 5 or 6 years, they'll be even. And we're all spending a lot of money that we could be spending on other things that are actually, hopefully, much more productive. Hopefully, there'll never be a time when we need those weapons. If there's ever a time when we need nuclear weapons, like the kind of weapons that we're building and that Russia has and that China has to a lesser extent, but will have, that's going to be a very sad day. That's going to be probably oblivion.
Do you see that as separate conversations, or do you see one giant summit with you, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, I could see that. Let things calm down a little bit. You know, when I left, we had no Middle East problem. We had no Russia going into Ukraine. They never would have done it. Putin never would have done it. And I came back and we got like the whole world is blowing up. So when we straighten it all out, then I want to have one of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia. And I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that. And I think we'll be able to do it.
Now that is phenomenal. He just said it again. Cut the military budget in half. Just a couple of months ago, we were on the verge of nuclear war. Donald Trump's saying, why do we have all these nuclear weapons when we can destroy the world 100 times over? When's the last time you heard a president talk that sensibly, that rationally? We had Joe Biden, demented Joe Biden, watching while the world became ever closer to a nuclear war. We had idiots like former Secretary of State Tony Blinken talking about nuclear war like it was no big deal. Yeah, we can survive that. Yeah, nuclear war is worth it for Ukraine. Donald Trump is saying, forget it. We're not going to have a nuclear war. We're going to get rid of the arsenal. We're going to cut the arsenal at least. And we're going to halve the military spending. Now that is ominous for people in the military-industrial establishment. They're hearing it and saying, what? You're going to cut the $1 trillion defense budget? That's our lifeblood. You're going to stop the war in Ukraine? We're making billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars off that war, as we've made billions of dollars off other foreign wars. We're making so much money off the U.S. defense budget and other defense budgets. Yeah, maybe we're not into World War III yet, but we could be. But even if we're not, we have to keep spending on military supplies and armaments. That keeps these people wealthy and rich, and it always has. That doesn't mean you have to be a pacifist. That doesn't mean you don't want a military, but you don't want to spend that much of your national treasure building up a military that makes a war more inevitable. Now, the last person to really tick off the military-industrial complex paid a huge price for it. And I'm not suggesting at all that anything bad is going to happen to Donald Trump. He's in all of our prayers, I'm sure. But there's a warning from history that the military-industrial complex doesn't like being toyed with. But that's too bad, because it's time to say, back off. It's time to resolve to resist their strong arm of oppression. Listen to the words of President John F. Kennedy just a couple of months before his very untimely death by assassination.
What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears. But we have no more urgent task. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal.
Beautiful words. Who are the warmongers today? Well, here's one. Here's a flashback.
Will and have to stand every single day until Ukraine wins this war.
Let's say, Justin, you're in the dustbin of history. The parade has gone by and you're forgotten. And your warmongering words will not mean anything. Here's the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, talking about what the reality is today in Ukraine.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
I wanted to show you something else here before we close, because I thought this was brilliant. One of the reasons I was so enthusiastic about the election of Donald Trump was the fact that Robert Kennedy Jr. was going to be his Health and Human Services Minister. And here I wanted to share this little clip with you, because I think it says everything about why we should be optimistic today about what's happening.
Office was in 1961, and I came here to meet, or 1962. I came here and I had a meeting with my uncle, who was president, and where we talked about the environment. He was involved deeply, as we all know, in restoring physical fitness to this country. He challenged at one point during his administration, he challenged Americans to do a 50-mile walk, which I ultimately did. But I remember the day that my father completed his walk. We were staying up at Camp David, and my father came in after 18 hours walking on the C&O towpath with his feet bleeding and blisters on them. My father had one of his best friends was Al Lowenstein. And Al Lowenstein ultimately was a congressman from New York who was assassinated himself in 1980. But Al Lowenstein had started the Dump Johnson movement to get rid of President Johnson and end the Vietnam War. And at the time that he started it, people just thought it was a fool's errand. And ultimately, he asked my father to run for president against Johnson. My father wouldn't do it at that time, and he asked Gene McCarthy. McCarthy did it, and he joined that campaign. And my father ultimately ran, and Johnson then dropped out. So Al Lowenstein succeeded. And although Al Lowenstein was on the other side now, running against my father with Gene McCarthy, my father wrote him a note, a quote from Emerson, where he said, if a single man plant himself firmly on his own ideal and there abide, the whole wide world will come around to him. For 20 years, I've gotten up every morning on my knees and prayed that God would put me in a position where I can end the childhood chronic disease epidemic in this country. On August 23rd of last year, God sent me President Trump. All right. And he gave me...
Now, I thought that was a beautiful moment. It's a moment of optimism. And Trump delivered on that promise. Thank you so much for watching today, folks. God bless you. Have a very happy Valentine's Day. Have a great Friday. We will see you at the rally tomorrow, but I will be back this afternoon if we get some word from the federal court on whether Justin Trudeau's prorogation of Parliament was unconstitutional, was illegal, was improper, and whether or not the judge is going to call the House of Commons back. We'll be back on the air later to talk about that, depending upon what happens today. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll be back again soon. Resolve.